fight. The pretty looking people, but I can tell you people, they were the devil's children.
Greetings from Castle Goring from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. Today we will hopefully, the Lord be praised, finish that book review. So without further ado, I am going to, chapter 32 is called Transit. And it provides a very good explanation of how Harry and Meghan used to whip themselves up into absolute outrage to justify their desired objective of leaving the royal family for California while they were in Vancouver. Harry and Meghan, in my view, are very adept at playing each other off against each other to achieve their objectives. Next one, on page 312, next good point is they are encouraged by their Californian money people. And Bauer paints a very good picture of how they had their, or her, it really is her, greed played upon by people who were going to make a commission out of her. He demonstrates next the calculatedness of the Oprah interview, because his line of reasoning is that Harry and Meghan were planning the Oprah interview from before their wedding. And now, of course, it's kicking in a big way. There's a very good section on the following page and on this page about how they laid out their propaganda blitzkrieg plans. It really is worth reading because he nails them down beautifully. Harry, according to Bauer, is of the firm opinion that the royal family will accept their demands. This is when they are in Vancouver, and they have whipped themselves up into these frenzies of outrage, and they are laying down the law to the royal family. Because you need to remember, Meghan was a huge star. She knows it, Harry knows it, and if we don't know it, that's because we're ignorant. And if the royal family didn't know it, that's because it was ignorant too. Bauer then lists their demands. He then alights upon Dan Wootton, whom I know and like. I'm sure to those of you who look at this show, you will know that Dan Wootton and I like and respect each other. And indeed, Dan Wootton and I were going to be hosting Thomas Markle over the Jubilee period. Of course, Mr. Bauer mentions that Dan Wootton was going to be hosting him, but is remarkably silent on the fact that it was over the newspapers all over the world and television stations and the internet that I was also going to be hosting him. Oh dear. So disappointing when people can't give credit where it's due. But of course, in my opinion, there are good reasons for that, which I will not go into, because I want you to buy Mr. Bauer's book, even though Mr. Bauer doesn't always play cricket with a straight bat. There's an excellent portrayal by Bauer of Harry's paranoia. And again, those of you who look at this show regularly will know that for some time I have been mentioning Harry's paranoia. Well, he goes into it. There's also a good account of Harry and Meghan returning to London from Vancouver. Do you remember when they went to the Canadian High Commission and led the world to believe that they were going to be relocating to Canada, when of course I don't recall Canada ever being spelt California, although of course they both begin with a C. Maybe that's what confused Megsy Baby and Harry. There's another good account of how Meghan and Harry justified their jumping the gun by making announcements while they were in negotiations with the royal family. They jumped the gun because they thought it was going to be advantageous to them. Because remember, Meghan, from her days on Suits, is not only a paralegal, but she's failed, of course, but she's also an ace bully. Slap him once, slap him twice, slap him again, and never misses an opportunity to slap. Well, they jumped the gun on their announcements, and in so doing, as I have pointed out previously here, flicked the Diana light switch. Very stupid error. He doesn't make this point, but I've made it before, and it was a really gross and stupid mistake for them to make. But, you know, I've often told my kids, too clever by half is stupid by whole. And Bauer shows this as he goes through their antics and their maneuverings and the calculations and manipulations, and let's be as straight as a corkscrew, straight, with every curve and twist and turn possible. Because what Meghan and Harry are trying to do is force the royal family's hand into giving them everything that they want. Now, Bauer accurately expresses their tactic of effectively trying to blackmail the Queen while insulting her, then asserting they're going to be collaborating with the Queen. So what they assert in their announcement is, that little old woman is my equal. Sorry, I need to get into character. That little 95-year-old or 94-year-old or however old she is, I mean, she's just an old woman. And she's my collaborator. I'm going to make the point that we're collaborating because I'm going to be gracious and pretend that she's my equal, although I know, mirror, mirror on the wall, don't I know? Lilibet is not my equal. I'm superior to you all. Well, Bauer covers that very well. On page 315, Bauer calls a spade in the most delicious way. And I am going to read out his comment to you, because I think it is well worth having it read out. In anticipation of the showdown, the Queen, Charles and William and their senior advisors agreed that while they wanted to avoid appearing vengeful, British taxpayers would resent subsidising the Sussexes if they avoided serious duties. They were also puzzled by a progressive royal, because remember, Meghan is selling herself to the world as a progressive royal. Why a progressive royal would want the title Her Royal Highness. Progressives, after all, were committed to changing an unequal society. Frivolity aside, they agreed that the monarchy could not risk the Sussexes' uncontrolled exploitation of their privileges and titles. Oh dear, oh dear. Isn't it naughty of Mr. Bower to pointedly show us what atrocious manipulators, calculators, and schemers Meghan and Harry were? Mr. Bower's got to be racist. He is racist. He is a racist, without a doubt. Then Bower explains Harry and Meghan's poverty relative to their expectations for the royal lifestyle they intend to have abroad. He doesn't actually go into it as thoroughly as I think he could have gone into it, because this is a point that needed to be hammered home. Because the royals are subsidised by the state. Once Harry and Meghan were on their own, commercialising, merching and prostituting their royal positions, they had to be funding themselves. He then goes into a very good account of the Sandringham Summit, which, again, I would recommend that you read the book if you want a good account of it. Then Bower highlights the Sun's Tony Parsons' support of the Queen, because, of course, as you will recall, this was huge news at the time, and it caused no end of controversy and conflict. He also points out how Anglophobic, and that's the word he uses, the New York Times was in its support of Meghan. He then quotes a racist rant against Britain by Afia Hirsch in the New York Times, which is well worth reading. Then there are further quotes from other accusers in the New York Times. The New York Times used to be a reputable and reliable organ of the press. It now seems to be an organ of windbaggism. Bower now has an excellent paragraph in page 319 on how the royal family's negotiating position was stymied by their belief that Meghan would stoop to anything to achieve her objectives. There, they are right. There is no depth, as I have pointed out repeatedly over the years, that Meghan Markle won't sink to achieve her objectives. Bower shows how their self-serving manipulation of the facts and events allowed them to make ridiculous claims. For, according to Bauer, logic played no part in the Sussexes' conduct. And there I would beg to disagree with Mr. Bauer. Logic played a great part in their conduct. They were always logical in the execution of their objectives. Where their inconsistency was revealed was in the puerility of their explanations of their motives. But that's not the same thing. Nevertheless, it's worth reading because it shines a light on their appalling behavior. He then shows how aghast Buckingham Palace was when Harry pitched up, having failed to come here for Christmas and having stayed in Vancouver except to come here for a fleeting visit, for he and Meghan to fly back separately to Vancouver. And they're now back in Vancouver pretending that they're going to be spending half the year in a Commonwealth country. And remember, Canada is one of the dominions. And half the year in Britain, when all along, those of us in the know knew that Harry and Meghan were going to be heading for California. Well, his passage about Buckhouse's reaction, with horror, they were absolutely aghast at Harry slithering across the United States, of course in a private plane. One, because remember, Harry and Meghan are eco-warriors, so it has to be one plane journey at a time, private plane journey, to give a speech for the J.P. Morgan Symposium in Miami, which was hosted by Gayle King. There's also a very good account of them needing $10 million per annum income, which, if you do the math, means they need really to have capital of, in this financial climate, $400 million to get that income post-tax. He then retails the story of, and he shows good disapproval of Meghan taking a swipe at the Queen about her having no jurisdiction over the word royal abroad. Because we need to remember that Megsy baby is a far more potent and powerful force than that dinky little old woman called Queen Elizabeth II. I mean, who does she think she is? And a star. She's just a queen. Chapter 33 is called Farewell. Harry and Meghan are now returning to London to say goodbye. And Meghan, of course, if you remember, shows up in that spectacular green outfit with the cape and the hat and the ill-fitting bra fitting through, and the ill-fitting undergarments bursting through the back. Not being unkind, just stating the facts. Bower, of course, doesn't say this, but what he does open the chapter with is Harry claiming that Meghan undoubtedly saved him. She certainly did, Harry, she certainly did. She saved you from decency and positivity. She saved you from being a dignified and beloved royal. My goodness, doesn't she deserve credit for being your savior? What a salvation that has been. Bower then enters into a good explanation of the Sussexes' need to spin their narrative, to enhance their earning power through constant visibility. We are not strangers to Meghan and Harry's constant visibility. Bower states it boldly. He details their last engagements, including the row about them not being part of the procession, the royal procession, at the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey, where Meghan wore that green outfit, and when the service was at end, to make sure that they jumped the queue, she shot through the chairs. Didn't exactly bounce down Sophie Wessex, but that's because Sophie Wessex got out of her way and jumped that queue, because Meghan's a woman of consequence. And a woman of consequence has to take her position, irrespective of whether anybody else agrees with it or not. There is a very entertaining account of how amidst scabies then span Meghan and Harry's goodbye event when they were, and of course, amidst scabies was asked to witness it as Meghan and Harry, those wonderful employers, because Meghan's never been known to bully anybody. What? 5 o'clock in the morning is unreasonable to be in touch with people? I don't think so. If I'm up, everybody else should be responding to me. Well, there's a very entertaining account of amidst scabies, Minister of Propaganda spinning it on behalf of the Nazi. Sorry, that was a slip of the tongue. I forgot that the primary Minister of Propaganda was Joseph Goebbels, and he acted on behalf of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Amidst scabies doesn't do that. He only acts on behalf of Meghan and Harry. And if there are parallels between their desires to silence their critics, force a false narrative down everybody's throats, the way Joseph Goebbels and the Nazis did, that's purely coincidental. Because Meghan and Harry have never killed anybody, unless you regard murder as having killed, or the variability of centrists and moderates who wish to retain the monarchic links in the Commonwealth. But I suppose that's figurative murder, not actual murder. So there are parallels, but there are divergences as well. Anyway, it's very entertaining what Bower does. Then there's an excellent summary of the conflict between Meghan and the royal family on page 325. And I am going to read it out. because it's well worth paying lip service to in more ways than one. Meghan's personal regret was not the lasting memory of her in-laws as she sped from Westminster Abbey to Heathrow for the flight to Vancouver. They recalled an angry adventuress, this is a really good description, denied the power to dictate her own fate. Despite all the efforts to welcome her, the wedding, the house, the staff, the foreign tours, and limited duties. Because, if I may interject, you will recall that I've previously said that Bauer goes to some lengths to point out how work-shy Meghan was, unless she was being paid for it. To resume the quote, Meghan had refused to accept that a monarchy epitomized continuity. There was no place for someone to overturn 1,000 years of evolution to spearhead a progressive new role. I think Bauer says that very well. I don't think anybody could say it better than he does. Then he goes into the consequences for the nation. The nation was bewildered and divided. Tom Bradby's criticism of the royal family. Few meaningful attempts were made by anyone to heal the wounds. Resonated with those who blamed the Windsors. And it goes on and on and on and on, quoting various people. But the fact of the matter is, he shows very well how divided the nation was and how deliberately Meghan and Harry had set out to divide the nation. So much for compassion and all those fabulous things that we Hollywood babes just love. There is then a very interesting description of the acquisition by Harry and Meghan of Catherine Saint Laurent, who was employed to head up Archewell. Read it. It's interesting. I don't think I need to read it out. There's also a very good description of the appeal of California, especially to Megsy Baby. There's a very good explanation about how this, he then comes up with something that is completely untrue and shows his ignorance of how society with a capital S works. Now, this is a problem that many royal writers have, because if they are not a part of society with a capital S, as opposed to a common S, they don't know the unwritten rules and they don't know how the whole business functions. And he certainly doesn't, because he may be a prosperous and successful writer, married to a successful journalist, and they may be great networkers on that level. But I don't think we are in danger of ever seeing them at a country house weekend or one of the old world social gatherings. Let's put it that way. And I'm not being snobbish. I'm simply making a statement of fact that it's not his world, it's not their world, they're not a part of it, and they don't understand. Well, he certainly doesn't understand how it works, and presumably she doesn't either, otherwise she would have been able to correct her husband. He is referring to Meghan and Harry's short and long-term prospects and says, this is about California. The city's society hostesses were certain to seek to adorn their parties with the Duke and Duchess. California's great and good would undoubtedly flock to experience the novelty. Harry's celebrity guaranteed attention. Blah, blah, blah. This is rubbish. Diana was ostracized by society. Harry and Meghan have been ostracized by society. Not the celebrity world, although they have been, as we now know, increasingly ostracized by that world and the elite of the political world as well as the celebrity world. But there was never any prospect of Harry and Meghan adorning any dining table of any society hostess. Take it from me, I know what I'm talking about. It's my world, and there is no prospect of them being received ever in any desirable society household. But I suppose this is the sort of understandable mistake that somebody who's writing about a world he has no access to and has no understanding of will make. There's a very good explanation about how the Sussexes now begin competing with the Queen and the royal family, and how they are encouraged to do so by Sunshine Sachs and their PR people, who don't seem to understand that the British crown is an extension of the state. And it is as inadvisable and undesirable to have a renegade member of the royal family promoted as if he and or she were the real McCoy, as it would be for Hunter Biden to cross over the Atlantic, pretend that he is the equal of the serving president, his father, and create havoc. There's a very good explanation of how Harry and Meghan are encouraged after the Queen's "We'll Meet Again" broadcast to the nation during COVID, when she set out to and succeeded in inspiring us, her people, and showing us that there was light at the end of the tunnel, which is her spiritual duty. And Harry and Meghan then muscling in and trying to share the limelight. Yes, there's a very good quote that he inserts about Harry and Meghan setting themselves up as the equal of the British monarchy. So the Queen has broadcast about COVID, and they've got to do the same thing. So there they are saying, we'll be sharing information and resources. So, since the Queen's broadcast has been a howling success, Harry and Meghan have to usurp her throne and step on her territory and trespass upon it. So they issue via Instagram a pathetic, posturing announcement. We will be sharing information and resources to help all of us navigate the uncertainty. From posting accurate information to learning about the measures we can take to keep ourselves and our families healthy. And Bauer puts the knife in by saying, the presumption that the Sussexes would be trusted to distill the accuracy of the science was audacious. Thank you very much, Mr. Bauer. I couldn't agree more, and I'm sure you agree too. 34, chapter 34, Paradise. It starts with, in May 2020, Meghan could say she had achieved the American dream. He then goes on to list her achievements. 16 lavatories in which she could pretend to be a queen sitting on those 16 thrones. As any excess fecal matter that wasn't blasted in our direction was presumably blasted down the sewers of Montecito. He goes into some of the neighbors, like Ellen DeGeneres, and he goes into doubts about the marriage lasting, and that Meghan has the power and influence and uses it to intimidate her critics into silence. Well, that might have been so then, but she has dramatically overplayed her hand since then, and it's certainly not so now. But to give him his due, he's covering the story contemporaneously, and it is worth noting what he says, because it is accurate. He then has Meghan convincing Harry about white privilege and to support Black Lives Matter, notwithstanding the fact Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization. The heads of Black Lives Matter have shared their prosperity not with the people, but with themselves, buying $1 million homes, and showing us that if there's such a thing as white privilege, there's such a thing as black corruption as well. Oh dear, oh dear. But Bauer is very good on making these points. Now, on page 322, it must be 332. Bauer is wrong when he says, sorry, I put the wrong number on the notes. He's wrong when he says that Meghan, who is pontificating as usual, inserting herself into all scenarios so that she will remain relevant by being in the press on a daily basis. Do you remember? She gave a speech that was directed at the graduating class of the Immaculate Heart, her old alumna? Well, Mr. Bauer says her audience were graduates of her old school, the Immaculate Heart. No, Mr. Bauer. First of all, her audience was, not were. One audience is, two audiences are. Didn't your English grammar master or mistress teach you about collective nouns and singular and plural? Plainly not. This is not the first time you've made that error. And you compound it by not only making an error in grammar, but an error in fact, because her audience were graduates of her old school, the Immaculate Heart. No, they weren't. She wasn't invited by the school. She usurped a position and she broadcast to them. They were her target, not her audience. She wasn't invited to do it. She forced herself upon them. And we have no idea of knowing how many of her targets formed an audience. So I just make that point for what it's worth. And to those of you who think that I'm here to only praise the man and not I'm here to comment upon the quality of his work. Good, bad, or indifferent. And since it's mostly good, I'm not apologizing for picking him up on things when he ought to be picked up on them. Bauer then quite rightly goes into Meghan's political activism and how she and Harry are now making contradictory and damaging comments about the Commonwealth. And this was a huge thing at the time in Britain, and it has proven to have been a huge thing in terms of the Commonwealth as well. And I now speak as a Jamaican who know personally through friends of mine in Jamaica the tremendous damage Meghan has done to the centrist cause in the Commonwealth. He then touches upon how Meghan and Harry's popularity plummets in the UK, while he claims it remains static in the US. But his last sentence is misleading and shows, and I'll read it out. In America, Meghan and Harry remained popular. That's not so. Meghan and Harry remained as popular ostensibly in America as they had hitherto been, but they have never been the stars in America that they were in the United Kingdom. And I don't know where Mr. Bauer and other British journalists and or writers such as Tom Bauer and Andrew Morton get their information from, because Meghan and Harry are not huge stars in America. Most Americans neither know nor care about them. Yes, they have their PR people promoting them in various rags, because they are rags. People, Vanity Fair, all the magazines that 30 years ago were so chic and desirable and are now just crummy. Chapter 35 is the trial. He starts with Harry stating, "It was destroying my mental health." Harry said about the British media, he blamed them for freeing from London. I was like, this is toxic. So I did what any husband and father would do. I need to get my family out of here. Blah-de-blah-de-blah. He has a very excellent account thereafter of Harry and Meghan and their manipulation of the legal system. Now, Bauer is a barrister by trade. He knows his way around the law, and it shows, and it's really worth reading. He has Meghan deceiving the court and inducing amid scabies to provide a misleading witness statement on her behalf to the court with regard to Mr. Justice Warby's trial of the Mail on Sunday action. It's because Meghan, and he goes into this later as well in the book, and effectively he is saying that Meghan lied to the court by claiming to not remember what she had to have remembered, and that she induced scabies to give a misleading statement to the court, which was effectively, he doesn't spell it out, but the natural consequence of her action and Scabies' action, in that he also gives a misleading witness statement to the court, is that Meghan is inducing Scabies to suborn perjury. And Meghan and amid Scabies, if you think this is defamatory and that I am stating something and that Mr. Bauer has stated something that is untrue and unfair, and that it is not absolutely the fact of what happened, please feel free to sue. Please feel free to sue. I will see you in court, even if Bauer doesn't, but I think Bauer will as well. Now we come to chapter 36, the jigsaw. And this is taking so long that I'm afraid I'm going to have to start already with Sue a little bit more quickly. Otherwise I'll be here forever. And you will be here forever. And I don't want to deprive you of the pleasure of doing something else. And also, I really think if you're interested, you should read the book. Bauer has a very good description of Meghan's branding of herself as an influencer, because that's what she's trying to do. She is trying to do a universal Tig, cloaked in royal raiment and making herself money out of it. That's what she's trying to do. And if she can get political advantages out of it and end up having a political career, so much the better. There is an excellent and very funny account of their employees who have to respond to Meghan's gospel, because the picture he paints, which I have actually stated before, is that Meghan is actually a messianic figure who regards herself as a messiah and who is trying to create a cult with her as its leader and Harry as its chief, well, as her chief cheerleader. On page 344, 345, he has Meghan describing herself as the most trolled person in the entire world in 2019. And he then makes the rather entertaining observation that this was an exaggeration since Adele and Gemma Collins were among the many who were even more trolled. She recited how abuse had left her isolated and othered. Othered. God, you talk about a pretentious piffler, isn't she just? Being the victim of the racist antagonism that was manufactured and churned out was, she said, almost unsurvivable. And so he goes on and on about how Meghan, having created this false narrative and created a phony platform from which she is going to save the world while saving herself from anything but a billionaire lifestyle, is going to be the cult leader. So she now inveigles herself into things like stop hate for profit. And she and Harry are there wangling their way as political activists, notwithstanding the fact that this is in total breach of every royal protocol. He shows up her hypocrisy and does it in the most entertaining way by showing the parallels between her present posturing and her as a creator of the Tig. He has Meghan invading her own privacy in the New York Times as she writes a speech about that miscarriage. Do you remember that miscarriage? Aurora, come and console me. Come and console Marty. Come on, kiss Marty, console Marty. Oh yes, Aurora needs to console Marty. Yes, Marty's grief-stricken on Meghan's behalf because she was pregnant and lost the baby while Archie was in her hair, and she sang a lullaby to him just like Julia Roberts did in that movie, and spotted a crayon underneath the table that the naughty, inefficient maid hadn't picked up. Because Meghan's always perfect. She sees everything. She's all-seeing. She's the Messiah. Yes, he has her invading her privacy with that invasive account. And then, was it 3 minutes, 3 hours, 3 days, or 3 weeks later, she was pregnant again. And within a matter of 3 eyelids blinking, she had swollen up so that she looked at least 17 months pregnant, being photographed in H's lap with Archie balancing on that huge mound when she was what? 3 minutes pregnant, or was it 3 weeks? Oh dear. Meghan does have the ability to carry babies in the most flagrant fashion, doesn't she? Not that Bauer says that in the book. However, he does make a good point about her political activism and her political support for the Democrats, and how that is totally against the spirit and the protocols, not only of royal practice, but the Sandringham Agreement, and he quotes, Meghan and Harry agreed to uphold the values of Her Majesty, and in the process of their political activism were flagrantly breaking their word. He then has a rather cutting comment about cut off from London's purse. The financial jigsaw became important, and he goes into the Spotify and Netflix deals and repeats the figures that have been mentioned and bandied about. But anybody who knows anything about business knows that those figures are not accurate. Bauer makes a good point about Harry's readiness to partner with the producers of The Crown, notwithstanding knowing that The Crown is a shocking abuse of the royal family's right to privacy and to exist with peaceful coexistence and respectful dignity. But he makes the point with Harry and Meghan, it's all about the money. Their loyalty goes no further than her pocket. He touches upon Harry's need to constantly assert his royal status. So he then has him trying to get a wreath laid at the British Remembrance Day service and failing to do so. So what do Harry and Meghan do? And at this point, I have to tell you, the book is really, in my opinion, getting arduous, because Harry and Meghan's conduct is so reprehensible. And as he repeats and puts each nail in their coffin and hammers it home, it's an uphill struggle, but it's worth reading because he leaves no stone unturned, including that flagrant display of disregard for decency as Harry and Meghan, he with his medals, she with her black high heels, stomped over the graves of the fallen in LA's National Cemetery to lay a wreath and keep themselves relevant and in the public eye. He then very wisely goes into Meghan's support for cancel culture and how she supports the censorship of the sitting president of the United States of America at the time, Donald Trump, to be cancelled by places like Facebook and Twitter. Because, of course, if Meghan doesn't agree with what you're saying, you should be muzzled. And as Harry says, the First Amendment is bonkers. They both believe that. And Bauer hammers home that point. He makes the point that Meghan's cynical posture of being a victim of racism since 2015 is nothing but a pose, and that she has hopped on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon and hitched her train to the George Floyd bandwagon in the most disgraceful manner possible. I mean, a royal duchess hawking her wares and monetizing racism to her personal benefit. He's right to make these points. He then has Harry, at Meghan's behest, of course, because Harry has been taught by Meghan, wading in, accusing Britain of structural racism. Structural racism. And the chapter ends with a scathing account of Opal and Meghan dancing a diabolical tango of self-interest and self-promotion as they are about to set up the royal family and the British people unfairly and untruthfully, because they are going to do it with Meghan's truth. And Meghan's truth always excludes the truth. 37, chapter 37 is called Netflix. Bauer sets the scene well for Harry's betrayal of his family and the nation's interests. He sets the scene very well at the beginning of the book. Of the chapter. He reveals that Harry pestered James Corden's producers into making that show, where, remember, Harry, hail fellow well met on the bus in LA, stopping at somebody's house and effectively saying in his very delicate manner that he wants to take a pee. So distasteful. Then he goes into a very interesting concept of how willing the Sussexes are to humiliate themselves as long as they will end up making money. It's a very interesting concept that he goes into in that regard. And he brilliantly uses the Daily Star's headline, re Meghan's pregnancy, to expose her as a publicity-seeking hypocrite. He makes a good point on the Sussexes' publicity offensive and how it has been affecting the royal family's policy, national policy agendas. And the dilemmas Sir Edward Young, the Queen's private secretary, has had in dealing with this problem. He shows how Meghan was able to manipulate evidence next with Warby to give the summary judgment that he gave in her favour. He's alluded to this earlier, he's coming back to it now. He goes into the bafflement at Warby's judgment by the media and members of the legal profession. Well, I have to tell you, I have impeccable connections in the legal profession. And the bafflement is not quite as extreme as Bauer makes it out to be. Where Bauer is right and doesn't highlight it enough is how Meghan manipulated the system with the connivance of Amit Scabies to suppress evidence, knowing that if she was able to do this, she would be able to possibly get a summary judgment, and did. The fault lies with Meghan and amid scabies, providing untrue accounts of their conduct to the court in sworn witness statements. And if I am inaccurate, Meghan and amid scabies sue me. I will see you in court. Because you know and I know that you provided false evidence. You might have then excused it with the fact that you didn't remember. But the fact of the matter is, you should have remembered. And whether you did or didn't remember, it is still untrue evidence. It is false evidence. And had it been true evidence, you would never have got that summary judgment. There's then a very good account of how Valentine Lowe of the Times was able to publish the story about the bullying accusations against Meghan, and how Rebecca English, the Daily Mail royal correspondent, accused Meghan and Harry of nothing but hypocrisy, justifiably. And Meghan's totally unfounded victimhood comments through Jenny Affia of shillings. And the chapter ends with Meghan's self-justifying rubbish. Chapter 38 is called The Interview. You need to read the book. It's very well covered by Bauer. I don't need to go into it. Everybody knows about The Interview. Oprah's unprofessional conduct, Meghan's flagrant lies, Harry's lies, the fact that their lies couldn't even accord with each other, others' version of their version of the lie. It's all there. We all know about the Oprah interview. I'm not going to repeat any of this. Read the book if you want to know. It's well done. Chapter 39 is called Backlash. And there's a very good observation from Bauer about Meghan condemning her children to the fate she complained to both her husbands she suffered from, namely no family around her. Well, of course, we all know that's a lie, because Meghan had Doria's family and the Markle family around her for many holidays, many celebrations, all her life. But she's quite determined to replicate the deprivation that she has created for herself by creating it for her children. Bauer goes into this very well. He also recounts how William offered an olive branch to Harry after Harry and Meghan went back to America, and how Harry flagrantly abused William's trust by bleating to Gayle King, who of course shared the confidence with all of America, because there is no stone that the Sussexes won't unturn if it's going to make them money or keep them in the public eye. As I've been saying for years, they are real fame junkies, and this book really nails it down. On page 380, Bauer states that Meghan had become a significant force. I dispute that. Meghan had become a dangerous force. Bauer, I think, to leaven the loaf, he needs to be positive about Meghan. And I think he does it in terms of totting up her failures as if they were successes, when they're not successes. They've shown the world, they being Harry and Meghan, that they have failed. And they simply show the world every other day that they have failed. Their attempts at posing as successes and as potent forces, influential forces, getting publications to assert that they are public forces. These are not borne out by the facts. They're not borne out by anything more substantial than self-assertion and assertion in the media. And only a limited portion of the media at that. So I would take issue with that conclusion on Mr. Bauer's part. Having said that, I get where he's coming from. He then makes an astute comment about the way the Sussexes have gone about setting up their companies in Delaware. He's then very sarcastic and very witty and droll about Harry's activities with BetterUp. I'm not going to spoil it for you by reading it out to you. Read it for yourself. It will make you chuckle. He then has and Harry's cohorts conspiring via the Aspen Institute's Commission on Information Disorder to muzzle free speech. And anybody who disagrees with them is to be condemned and cancelled or muzzled. Dangerous people. He has another droll account of Harry and Meghan joining New York's Ethic Bank as impact partners, and he shows how completely unethical, in their terms, the investments of the Ethics Bank are. So yet again, we have these poseurs pretending to be ethical and to be whiter than white when they are muddier than the filthiest muddy water. He then has Prince Philip dying and the Queen commenting how relieved she was that Meghan wasn't coming. And this has got a lot of attention, and I think it's good that it's got a lot of attention. The Queen is a decent human being, and she deserves to have put her husband, her beloved husband, to rest in the way she did. And I use the word beloved, and I can tell you as a fact, she uses the word beloved in that same context. I'm not going to tell you how I know this, because I'm not violating any confidences, but this is how the The Queen refers to Prince Philip. And I am glad Bauer made the point that the Queen, and indeed nobody in the royal family, or who had any sympathy for the royal family, wanted that cheap and vulgar hussy flaunting herself here as if she were Joan Collins after a very active night, as she sashayed into St. George's Chapel. Nobody wanted her here, and thank God she didn't come. He then goes into a very cutting sequence of events of Harry's disloyalty to the family, Apple TV and their series on mental health, The Me You Can't See. I'm not going to repeat it. Read the book. It's worth reading. Now I have to correct an error that Bauer makes on page 388. And it's, again, I'm surprised at some of the errors he makes, I have to tell you. I mean, everybody makes errors, but some of them are so flagrant that you just wonder, why did you make that error? He says, and I quote, Harry, he's speaking about, told his grandmother about the birth and their decision to call their daughter Lilibet. This is untrue. Everybody knows it's untrue. And Bauer should know it's untrue too. Harry told his grandmother he wanted to name his daughter after her. She assumed the name was going to be Elizabeth. That's her name. He never told her at any time that he was going to name that child Lilibet. Mr. Bauer, there's no point in dragging out every little dusty nail that exists to hammer home the points that you are making, which I'm glad you've made, by the way, and that you're nailing her coffin down firmly, and then throwing her a ratchet to undo some of it, especially over something as important as this and as flagrant as this. Sorry, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, and you need to correct that in the next version of your book. He's then very good on the Sussexes' legal wrangles and their threats to the press and their attempts to suppress valid criticism. Because that he then goes into, and the chapter comes to an end. And we are mercifully reaching the end, hopefully. 40 is grandstanding. There's a wonderful opening sequence of Harry being observed every morning smoking weed in the garden. So much for being clean, Harry. I know that weed is legal in California, but if you're an addict, you're not allowed to take drugs. By your own account, everything you've said suggests you're an addict. You can't take drugs. Thank you, Mr. Bauer, for that. He then goes into the book deal and he predicts the contents, which I'm not going to go into. You can read it for yourself. And Meghan's The Bench is published to great hopes, because it's going to sell at least 400 million copies. It doesn't even sell 4,000 copies. Shh, Aurora, Mickey, don't tell anybody. The book's a failure. He now has several instances of these brave eco-warriors flying from Aspen to Santa Barbara, etc., by private jet. Because remember, every action counts, every drop of rain counts, every leaf counts, every footprint counts, unless you're Harry and Meghan, in which case it doesn't. He goes into the whole business of Meghan and Harry wading into the political fray, with Meghan trying to get 2 Republican senators to change the way they vote so that they will vote in accordance with her desires. And she then writes Nancy Pelosi and the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer dead against all royal protocols. And I think we now come to chapter 41, Victory. The Mail on Sunday loses its appeal, which is hardly surprising because the Palace were not as forthcoming as they should have been, number one. And number two, Meghan falsified her witness statement, and so did Amid Scabies, which caused Warby to give the summary judgment. And he goes into the ins and outs of the judges, and I'm not going to go into it. You need to read it. It's very well done. He does make the point that Andrew Caldecott, who is the Mail on Sunday's barrister, was facing an uphill struggle. And there I agree. However, I have a very little regard for Andrew Caldecott as counsel. Andrew Caldecott acted against me when I sued the Mail for defamation. He was not particularly impressive. Of course, he was going to be up against George Carman, who, fortunately for him, was already in court, the same court, Court 13. These libel actions are heard in Court 13 in the Strand in London. And George Carman was representing Terry Venables, which was the trial before ours. And so I had to get another barrister at the 99th hour to represent me, who was very good. Andrew Caldecott was not particularly impressive. Having said that, he didn't have much of a case. This time he did have much of a case. But you know, when you have determined claimants who do not scruple to falsify witness statements and conveniently forget things that nobody could really forget unless it was in their interest to forget, and you have them suborning perjury from their poodles, it's a pretty high benchmark to litigate against. Chapter 42 is called Revenge. And there's a very dramatic opening to this chapter, which I'd suggest you read. There's a good summary of the people of Britain's perplexity with regard to Harry and Harry's conduct and his betrayal of the Queen and the nation. This is where Bauer is really very good. He expands the subject to take in the complete treachery of this couple and how they have betrayed not only our beloved Queen and his supposedly beloved grandmother, but the British nation as well. He then suggests, which I found interesting, that Harry might be the source of certain leaks to the Sunday Times about his father's fundraising activities. In particular, the Mubarak-Mahfouz case, where there was a lot of criticism recently of Prince Charles, and Harry wades in and volunteers information to the detriment of his father. So whether he leaked the information before, which would be truly appalling, or simply opportunistically took advantage of his father's vulnerability to put the boot in, which is terribly appalling, terribly appalling. I mean, that is an act of opportunistic treachery, the like of which everybody should shy away from viewing, much less doing. But Bauer goes into it chapter and verse, and congratulations for doing so, Mr. Bauer. He then has another untrue, Bauer has another untrue statement. He's now stating that Virginia Giuffre was an underage girl of 17. Mr. Bauer, you are a barrister. You know the law. You know the importance of words. It is highly irresponsible and indeed very destructive of you to make statements that are totally untrue and you ought to know are untrue. The age of consent in this country is 16. A girl over the age of 16 is not underage for the purposes of carnality. A girl in the state of New York over the age of 17 is also not underage. She is legally of age. You know, just because you're a journalist and married to a journalist doesn't mean that you have to keep on dragging your hack attitudes with you into works that really you lessen their regard by coming up with putting in the little boots like this. Don't show your prejudices when they are so easily exposed. You're weakening the regard that people would have for you. And you're certainly weakening my regard, because there's no excuse for that one either. It's a total outrage that you've said it. Then he does something immediately that is the absolute opposite of irresponsibility, and very accurately describes Harry had embraced America's toxic political battle about race as a platform for his wife's and his own advancement. He then beautifully goes into the NAACP Awards and observes that Harry's approval ratings in Britain had sunk to 13%, and that Meghan's were scraping the bottom of the barrel. Of course, that's something she's very familiar with, at 8%. And there's a good ending to the chapter with Harry and Meghan's Archewell entities and other activities shrouded in secrecy and mystery. And he ends with the conclusion, but its prime purpose was clear, publicizing the Sussexes. Everything they do is to publicize themselves, hawk their wares, monetize. And the final chapter is 43. It's called Fallout. It begins with a rather good sentence. At the end of March 2022, Kate and William became victims of Harry and Meghan's fevered self-promotion. Within hours of arriving in Jamaica, the second stop during an 8-day visit to the Caribbean, anti-British sentiment wrecked their goodwill tour. It's absolutely true. I've covered this on my YouTube channel before. The fallout has been tremendous. The damage Harry and Meghan have done to the British nation, the British people, the British Commonwealth, the citizens of the Commonwealth is incalculable. They are truly destructive, malignant forces for nothing but detrimental self-promotion posturing. I support Bauer's book because I hope it will help to shut down those two mischievous mongers, because they are mongers of the highest order. He goes into a very good description of Meghan's failure to understand the Queen's role. Because Meghan, you see, is a small-time grifter. In terms of card sharks, she's someone who plays card tricks on the street. I don't know if they still do it, but in my day in New York, you used to have these card sharks who would play these trickster games on the streets. Meghan has taken that attitude and technique into the Claremont Club, and she doesn't understand. The purpose of the game might be to win, but the rules are entirely different. And if you don't abide by them, you expose yourself as a card shark. She has taken all the techniques that she learned to hustle herself up to the top, and having arrived at the top, she is exposing herself as the hustler that she truly is. On page 413 and 414, he then makes another astonishing and inaccurate comment, and I'm going to read it. During the Jubilee celebrations, which the whole world knows were a roaring success, and the British nation poured out and showed their tremendous love for and support of the Queen and the monarchy. So, bearing that in mind, here is Mr. Bauer's take on it. I suppose once a hack, always a hack. During the Jubilee celebrations, few believed that Britain would abandon the monarchy. That's right. But equally, few did not recognise that the public's enthusiasm for the royal family had, within just 4 years, been diminished. This was caused by Andrew's behaviour and partly by Megxit. That's not so. I would dispute that and say that there has been a small segment of the population that has had their support for the monarchy eroded. But that is an ever diminishing percentage of the population. And Mr. Bauer's book will help to diminish it even further. Because Mr. Bauer and I and other people like us are shining the light of exposure on these two chancers and showing how malignant they are and how untrue and unfair their claims have been where the British nation and the British people are concerned. Mr. Bauer claims to be a monarchist, so I understand why he would possibly be over-egging the pudding. But Mr. Bauer, there's no need to over-egg the pudding. Your book has been a wonderful contribution to exposing Meghan and Harry as the truly dreadful, appalling characters which they, through their conduct, have shown us they are. And you should be congratulated for that. And I would like to end with a very good comment that Mr. Bauer makes towards the end of his book about Meghan. He says, concealing humiliation to achieve success has transformed a compassionate young woman into a merciless opportunist. To advance herself, she not only abandoned her father and close friends, but first misled Harry's relations and then been accused of lying to Oprah Winfrey. The consequences for the Windsors were irrelevant to Meghan. She only considered the advantages to herself. Her television appearance with Winfrey had reinforced her global celebrity. The question was whether her damage to others, in revenge for their refusal to meet her demands, would eventually result in self-destruction. And I think we can safely close on that note. I don't actually agree that Meghan was ever a compassionate person. I think my researches shows me that she was like many people who exhibit this personality traits that she does. She was seductive with the mask of compassion as and when it suited her purposes. But you know, if you are truly an opportunist, you use the tools that will get you to climb that cliff. She is a mountaineer. That's what she is. And when gloves worked, she put them on. And when the pickaxe was called for, she pulled that out. And when she had to snarl, she snarled. Don't be fooled by the Meghan Markles of this world. They conceal what they are with the patina of charm, compassion, and humility, and all the other social graces that they have at their beck and call when it suits them to keep people sweet. But the true mark of a person is what you won't do in certain situations. Decent people don't do certain things. It's as simple as that. And if you will do them, you are not a decent person. And if you are not a decent person, the likelihood is you never were. People don't start out being good and become bad. They start out being what they are, and then whatever they are grows.